The council took away citizenship from 3 billion humans. She nodded. Good. The chamber was built to shrink him. Silas Corvin knew it the moment he stepped through the iris door. The seats rose in concentric tiers, each row angled so that every delegate looked down at the central floor. The ceiling soared 47 meters overhead, but the speaking well sat in a shallow depression, as if the architects had intended for anyone standing there to feel small. The air smelled of ionized resin and something older, the accumulated breath of 312 species over 2,400 years. Silas did not look up. He was 74 years old, a former colonial records keeper from the Kepler 442 settlement, and he had spent the last 11 years in the Council's auxiliary archives, cataloging documents no one had requested in decades. He wore the same gray tunic he'd worn for 6 years. His hands, spotted with age, held a single folio case. Nothing else. The vote had concluded 47 minutes ago. The tally glowed on the hemispherical screen above the chamber. 847 delegates in favor, 203 against, 12 abstentions. Resolution 9184 cue the revocation of collective citizenship for all humans residing in the Outer Rim expansion zones. 3 billion people, rendered legal ghosts, property of no state, subject to no protection. The council genuinely believed it was right. They had spent 6 sessions explaining why. Human expansion was destabilizing. Human colonies were consuming resources at rates the council's ecological models could not sustain. The vote was not punitive, the speaker had insisted. It was corrective. Silas had sat in the observer gallery and listened. He had not spoken. He had not objected. When the final tally appeared, he had simply nodded. Good, he had said, just loud enough for the delegate beside him, a young Vrelian clerk, to hear. The clerk had turned. His face, a smooth plate of pale cartilage, had tilted in the way Vrelians did when they were trying to read a human expression. He did not understand. Silas could see that. The clerk was too young to know what he had heard. Now the chamber was emptying. Delegates filed toward the transit tubes, their conversation low and satisfied. The crisis was managed. The humans had been contained. The procedural music, a low harmonic tone that signaled session's end, still hummed in the walls. Silas walked to the center of the speaking well. He did not hurry. He did not raise his voice. Speaker, he said. The speaker, a tall being of the Mornath consensus, paused at the chamber's exit. Around her, the remaining delegates slowed. There is no open floor, the speaker said. The vote is recorded. I know, Silas said. I helped write the law you just used. He placed the folio case on the lectern. It was old. The seal on its closure was the original Earth Accord sigil, a design the council had retired 89 years ago. He opened it. He removed one document. He placed it on the lectern's reading surface, face up. He said nothing. The document was 11 pages. It was titled Articles of Perpetual Inclusion, Earth Accords, Session 0, Year 1. No one in the chamber had ever seen it. No one had asked for it in 2,389 years. The part that still keeps me up at night? What he pulled from that case, that comes next. 11 years earlier, the folio case had sat in a mislabeled crate in the decommissioned lunar repository, buried under transit manifests from a colony that no longer existed. Silas found it on a Tuesday. He remembered it was a Tuesday because the auxiliary archives had no windows, and the only way he knew what day it was came from the timestamp on the catalog terminal. Tuesday, 14:33, Standard Fleet Time. He had been cataloging for 6 years by then. The job was simple. Open a crate, scan the contents, assign a retention code, file the location. Most crates held nothing of value: shipping logs, personnel transfers, meal schedules from stations that had been abandoned before Silas was born. The council had been running for 2,400 years. It generated paper faster than anyone could read it. The crate was marked Lunar Transit, Kepler 442b, disposal authorized. Silas almost didn't open it. Disposal crates went straight to the incineration queue. But the manifest listed 47 items and the crate contained 48. One extra. A folio case, leather-wrapped, the size of a human head. He lifted it out. The seal caught the light, the Earth Accord sigil. A circle of 12 stars surrounding a single hand, palm up. He had seen it once before, in a history text from his childhood on Kepler 442b. The founding charter. The document that had established the council before the council had a name. Silas sat on the floor of the archive bay. He opened the case. Inside were 11 pages printed on archival paper that had yellowed at the edges but held its ink. The first page was the preamble. The second was Article 1. He read through to Article 7, Section 3, and stopped. No species admitted to this council may, by subsequent legislation, be stripped of the status by which it was admitted. Such status is held in perpetuity, irrevocable by majority vote, and may only be altered by unanimous consent of all founding members, including the species so affected. He read it again. Then he read Article 12, added in Session 4. Humanity named as successor in full to the Terran Collective, inheriting all standing, rights, and protections of founding membership. Silas was 63 years old. He had spent 31 years as a colonial records keeper, first on Kepler 442b, then on the transit station at Ganymede Ridge, then here in the auxiliary archives of the Galactic Accord Council. He knew what a dead document looked like. He knew what a sleeping document looked like. This was neither. This was a document that had never been superseded. It had simply been forgotten. He spent the next 3 months cross-referencing. The active registry contained 14,000 amendments to the Earth Accords, but none of them touched Article 7 or Article 12. The case law database held 2,400 years of rulings, and in all that time, no council had ever formally challenged the language Silas held in his hands. They had built new laws on top of it. They had passed resolutions that contradicted it, but they had never struck it down, because they had forgotten it existed. Silas did not tell anyone. He returned the folio case to the crate. He filed the crate under its original label. Then he began a second catalog, a private one, tracking every mention of the Earth Accords in the active registry, every citation, every footnote. He wanted to know how deep the forgetting went. It went all the way down. In the first year, he found 3 references. In the second year, 1. In the third year, none. By the 5th year, the Earth Accords existed only in history texts, and even those treated it as a ceremonial document, a relic of the founding moment with no legal weight. The Council had rewritten itself so many times that the original foundation had become invisible. Silas kept working. He kept cataloging. He kept the folio case in his locker, wrapped in a cloth that had once belonged to his wife, Myra. She had died on Kepler 442b 19 years ago from a lung infection the colony's medical printer couldn't treat. The cloth smelled of nothing now, but he kept it anyway. In the 6th year, he started a list. It began with a name he found in a citizenship dispute file. Yuki Tanako Duya, agricultural specialist, Kepler 442b, died age 34, status pending. The file had been open for 11 years. No one had closed it. Yuki had died waiting for the council to decide whether she counted as a person. Silas wrote her name in a small notebook. Then he found another. Marcus Webb, transit engineer, died age 61, appeal unresolved. Then another. Elias Vance, Jr., died age 22, documentation incomplete. Silas stopped when he saw that name. He sat in the archive bay for a long time, the notebook open on his knee. Elias Jr. had been his son. He had died on a transit run to the Outer Rim, caught in a documentation loop between 2 jurisdictions that each claimed the other was responsible for his safety clearance. The clearance had never come through. The ship had launched without it. The accident report listed the cause as pilot error. The pilot had been Elias Jr., and he had been flying a vessel he was not legally cleared to operate because no one had filed the right form. Silas closed the notebook. He did not cry. He had done his crying years ago in the dark of the archive bay where no one could hear him. What he did instead was keep writing. By the 8th year, the list had grown to 1,204 names. By the 10th year, 2,891. By the 11th year, 3,847. Humans who had died in the Outer Rim expansion zones, not from war, not from plague, from documentation errors. Citizenship disputes. Status ambiguities. Cases that had fallen through the cracks of a legal system that had never quite decided what humans were. Silas printed the final list on 14 pages of standard archival stock. He placed it in the folio case, behind the 11 pages of the founding charter. Then he waited. He did not know what he was waiting for. Not exactly. He knew the council was debating human status. He knew the ecological models were trending against expansion. He knew, because he cataloged the council's own documents, that a revocation vote was being drafted. But he did not know when it would come or whether he would still be alive when it did. He was 74 years old. His hands shook when he held a stylus for too long. His eyes blurred after 6 hours at a terminal. He wore the same gray tunic because buying a new one would require a trip to the commerce level. And the commerce level reminded him of Myra, who had loved the market on Kepler 442b, the noise and the color and the way people touched each other's shoulders when they passed. So he waited in the archives. He cataloged documents no one requested. He kept the folio case in his locker. And he watched the council's public session calendar the way a farmer watches the sky. The vote was called on a Thursday. Resolution 9184 Q. Silas sat in the observer gallery, the folio case on his lap, and listened to 6 sessions of debate. The speaker, Valinor of the Mornath Consensus, presided. She was tall, 2.4 meters, her body a column of diffuse bioluminescence that shifted from pale blue to violet depending on her mood. Her face, if it could be called a face, was a membrane of light and shadow that rippled when she spoke. Her voice carried harmonic undertones, as if she were always singing slightly out of tune with herself. She had presided over 847 sessions without procedural error. She moved with deliberate slowness, the way a predator moves when it does not need to hurry. The human expansion rate exceeds sustainable parameters, she said in session 1. Their colonies consume resources at a rate that destabilizes adjacent systems. A delegate from the Keth Dominion rose. The outer rim zones are not adjacent to any council-protected systems. The ecological model is theoretical. The model is council-certified, Valinor said. The data is clear. In session 2, a delegate from the Solhari Compact asked about transitional protections. 3 billion humans cannot be relocated in a single fiscal cycle. What provisions exist for phased withdrawal? Resolution 9184Q provides for administrative transition, Valinor said. Not relocation. The humans will remain in place. Their legal status will be adjusted. Adjusted to what? To non-citizenship. They will retain physical presence. They will lose collective representation, resource allocation, and legal protection under council law. Silas sat in the gallery, the folio case heavy on his knees. He watched the delegates. Some listened with genuine concern. Some listened with the blank patience of beings who had seen species come and go before. Some did not listen at all. They checked their tablets, whispered to aides, planned their next meetings. He watched the young Vrelian clerk beside him take notes. The clerk was new. Silas had seen him 3 sessions ago, wide-eyed and nervous, dropping his stylus twice. Now he wrote with the brisk efficiency of someone who had learned the rhythm of the chamber. He did not look up when Valinor spoke of 3 billion people losing protection. He wrote the number down and moved to the next line. In session 4, a human delegate rose to speak. Her name was Chen from the Earth delegation. She was young, 34, and she spoke with the careful precision of someone who knew her words would be parsed for weakness. The outer rim colonies are self-sustaining, she said. They do not draw on council resources. They do not destabilize adjacent systems. The ecological model you cite was developed by the Mornath Consensus, which has filed 12 territorial disputes against human colonies in the last 40 years. The model is not neutral. Valinor's membrane rippled. The delegate from Earth questions council procedure. This is noted. The ecological model was certified by the Council Science Authority, not the Mornath Consensus. The delegate's objection is overruled. Chen sat down. She did not argue. She knew, as Silas knew, that the vote was already decided. The council did not debate to change minds. It debated to record that debate had occurred. The outcome was built into the chamber's geometry, the way the seats looked down, the way the speaker stood above the speaking well. In session 6, the final debate, a delegate from the Yenu Collective asked the question that no one else had asked. What happens to the humans who are already council citizens, those living in the core systems, the protected zones? They retain individual citizenship, Valinor said. Resolution 9184Q applies only to collective status in the outer rim expansion zones. Individual humans in the core are unaffected. So we are not expelling humans, the delegate said. We are expelling their legal existence in one specific region. We are correcting an administrative error, Valinor said. The outer rim expansion was never formally approved under council charter. It was tolerated. Now it is not. Silas watched Chen's face. She was 34 years old. She had probably trained for this role her entire adult life. She had probably believed, as Silas had once believed, that the council was a forum where reason could prevail. Now she sat in a gallery seat, looking down at a floor built to make her small, and listened to a being of light explain that 3 billion people were an administrative error. The vote was called, 847 in favor, 203 against, 12 abstentions. Silas nodded. Good, he said. The young Vrelian clerk turned. His smooth face tilted. He did not understand, but he heard. Now in the emptying chamber, Silas stood at the lectern. The folio case lay open. The document lay face up. The speaker approached. She did not want to. Something in Silas's stillness, the way he stood with his hands folded behind his back, the way he did not watch her read, made compliance feel inevitable. She read. The chamber was silent. The delegates who had been leaving stopped, 47 of them, then 83, then 126. The document was simple. It was the founding charter of the council itself, drafted in the first session before the current legal code existed. Article 7, Section 3. No species admitted to this council may, by subsequent legislation, be stripped of the status by which it was admitted. Such status is held in perpetuity, irrevocable by majority vote, and may only be altered by unanimous consent of all founding members, including the species so affected. The council had been founded by 12 species. Humans were not among them, but Article 12, added in Session 4, named humanity as successor in full to the Terran collective, inheriting all standing, rights, and protections of founding membership. Silas had not written that, but he had found it. 11 years in the auxiliary archives, cataloging documents no one requested, and he had found the original folio in a mislabeled crate from the decommissioned lunar repository. He had cross-referenced it against 2,400 years of case law. He had confirmed that no subsequent council had ever formally superseded it. They had simply forgotten. The speaker looked up from the document. Her membrane had gone very still. "This is not in the active registry," she said. "No," Silas agreed. "It has not been cited in." She checked the document's authentication strip. 2,389 years. "No." "Then why?" She stopped. She understood. The chamber had filled again. 312 delegates, 612. The full assembly watching a single old man stand in a room built to make him small. Silas finally spoke, not to the speaker, to the document, to the room, to the 3 billion people who did not yet know they had been saved or that they had ever needed saving. "You built this chamber to look down on us," he said. His voice was quiet. It did not carry. It did not need to. The chamber's acoustics were perfect. "You built your laws to contain us. You voted to erase 3 billion of us because your models said we were consuming too much, expanding too far, being too much." He paused. "And in all that time, not one of you asked what we brought with us when we came." He touched the document with one finger. "We brought this, we built it, we preserved it, and we waited." The chamber had filled again. 312 delegates, then 612. The full assembly stood in concentric tiers, looking down at a single old man who had not moved from the speaking well. Silas stood with his hands folded behind his back. He had not raised his voice. He had not gestured. He had simply placed a document on a lectern, and let the weight of 2,389 years do what shouting could not. The young Vrelian clerk stood near the transit tube entrance. He had not left. His tablet hung at his side, forgotten. He was watching Silas with the same tilted head confusion he had shown when he heard the word "good" 47 minutes ago, but something had changed in his posture. He was leaning forward now, the way a child leans toward a fire they do not yet understand. Speaker Valinor looked at the document, then at Silas, then at the document again. Her membrane rippled, but the rhythm was wrong. The harmonic undertones in her voice cracked when she spoke. "This can be challenged," she said. "The council can vote to amend the founding charter. We can." "We can," Silas said. "You have the numbers. You always have the numbers." He reached into the folio case again. He removed a second document. This one was not old. It was 14 pages printed on standard archival stock. A list. Names, 3,847 of them. "I was going to read these aloud," Silas said. "If the vote had failed, if you had decided to keep us." He placed the list beside the founding charter. "But you didn't. You voted to erase us, so I will read them now, not as accusation, as record." He began. "Yuki Tanako Duya, agricultural specialist, Kepler 442b, died age 34, status pending." The chamber was silent. No one moved, no one left. "Marcus Webb, transit engineer, died age 61, appeal unresolved." A delegate from the Keth Dominion shifted in her seat. She was tall, armored in plates of dark chitin, and she had voted in favor of the resolution. Now she sat very still. "Elias Vance, Jr., died age 22, documentation incomplete." Silas's voice did not break. He had practiced this. In the archive bay at night, when no one was there to hear him, he had read the names aloud 47 times until the sound of his own son's name became a word instead of a wound. He had prepared for this moment the way a soldier prepares for battle. The only difference was that his weapon was memory. He read 47 names. The chamber listened. The air that had smelled of ionized resin now smelled of nothing. 2,400 years of accumulated breath had stopped moving. 612 delegates stood or sat in their concentric tiers, and not one of them spoke. When he finished, he closed the folio case. He looked at Speaker Valinor. "You may vote to amend the charter," he said. "You have the numbers. You always have the numbers. But the vote will be recorded. The attempt will be recorded." And every species in this chamber will know that you tried to erase 3 billion people, and that the only thing that stopped you was a piece of paper you wrote and forgot. He paused. I am 74 years old. I have been cataloging your forgotten laws for 11 years. I will not see the next century, but the document will, and the names will. That is what I brought with me when we came. The clerk drones hummed. The hemispherical screen flickered. Resolution 9184Q rendered inoperable by Founding Charter, Article 7, Section 3. Council Registry amended. Error logged. The chamber was silent for 11 seconds before the procedural music resumed. Speaker Valinor did not call for a vote. She did not move to challenge the charter. She stood at the edge of the speaking well, looking down at Sila's, and for the first time in 847 sessions, she did not know what to say. You planned this, she said finally, for 11 years. I catalogued, Sila said. I prepared, that is what archivists do. You could have produced this document before the vote. You could have stopped the debate entirely. Yes. Why didn't you? Silas picked up the folio case. He looked at the list of names still on the lectern. The clerk drones would scan them. They would enter the permanent record. In 2,000 years, someone would find them in an auxiliary archive and wonder who had placed them there. Because you needed to vote, he said, so that the record would show what you intended, not what you feared, not what you compromised, what you chose. He met her gaze, or rather he looked at the place where her eyes would have been if she had eyes. The Morneth consensus did not use eyes the way humans did. They sensed light through their membrane, read intent through thermal patterns and air displacement. Silas had learned this in the archives, in a document about Mornath sensory biology that no one had requested in 400 years. He knew that she could read his temperature, his pulse, the chemical trace of his skin. He knew that she could see he was not angry, he was not triumphant, he was not even relieved. He was simply finished. The document was always here, he said. The choice was yours, now the choice is recorded. That is the law, that is what I preserve. He turned toward the iris door. The chamber, built to shrink humans, had not changed. The seats still rose in concentric tiers. The ceiling still soared 47 meters overhead. The speaking well was still a depression in the floor. But 612 delegates watched him leave. And somewhere in the outer rim expansion zones, 3 billion people were waking up to mornings that would proceed exactly as they had yesterday, not knowing that an old man in a gray tunic had spent 11 years in a forgotten room, waiting for them to need him. At the door he paused. He did not turn. Speaker, he said, the next time you build a chamber to make someone small, build a shelf for their documents. We fill them. That is what we do. The iris closed behind him. The chamber was silent. The procedural music had stopped again, though no one had told it to. The clerk drones hovered over the lectern, scanning the 14 pages of names, the 11 pages of charter. The hemispherical screen still glowed with its error message, pale and small against the vast curve of the ceiling. Speaker Valinor stood alone at the edge of the speaking well. She looked at the document. She looked at the door. She looked at the young Vrelian clerk who was still standing by the transit tube, his tablet in his hand, writing something. What are you doing? She asked. The clerk looked up, his smooth face tilted. Recording, he said. Sir, the registry, it's still showing them as ghosts. Valinor's membrane went very still. The error has been logged. The system will update. Yes, Speaker, the clerk said, but he did not stop writing. In the auxiliary archives, 3 levels below the chamber, Silas returned to his terminal. He hung his gray tunic on the hook behind his chair. He sat down. He opened a new catalog file labeled at session 9184Q, documentation complete, and began typing. His hands shook slightly. He ignored them. He typed the date, the time, the resolution number, the charter citation, the vote tally, the error log reference. He typed for 11 minutes. Then he stopped. He looked at the folio case on his desk. The Earth Accord sigil caught the light from the terminal screen. He closed the case. He placed it in the bottom drawer of his desk, behind a stack of transit manifests from a colony that no longer existed. He did not lock the drawer. No one came to the auxiliary archives. No one had come in 11 years. He stood up. He walked to the small window that looked out on the transit hub. Ships came and went, their running lights blinking against the dark. Somewhere out there in the outer rim, a woman named Yuki Tanako Duya would have turned 45 this year if her status had not been pending. A man named Marcus Webb would have retired if his appeal had been resolved. A boy named Elias Vance, Jr., would have been 33, flying his own transit runs, maybe married, maybe with children of his own, if someone had filed the right form. Silas watched the ships. He did not cry. He had done his crying years ago in the dark of the archive bay where no one could hear him. What he did now was stand at the window, his spotted hands resting on the sill, and watch the lights blink on and off, the way hearts beat, the way documents accumulated, the way memory outlasted everything that tried to erase it. The terminal behind him beeped. A new document had arrived in the Council's public feed. Resolution 9184Q rendered inoperable. Error logged. He did not turn to read it. He had written it already, 11 years ago, in a mislabeled crate, in a room no one visited, with a cloth that smelled of nothing but the wife he had lost and the son he had failed to save. He stayed at the window until the shift changed. Then he sat back down. He opened a new crate. He began to catalog. In the chamber above, the clerk drones finished scanning the names. They filed them under permanent record, subcategory, civilian documentation, status, resolved. The list would sit there for 2,000 years. Some future archivist would find it, would wonder who had placed it there, would trace the authentication strip back to a terminal in the auxiliary archives, level 3, used by a records keeper named Silas Corvin, who had worked in silence for 11 years, and then walked out of a room built to make him small. The young Vrelian clerk stood at the transit tube, his tablet still in his hand. He had written 3 sentences. He did not know if they were important. He only knew that he had heard an old man say, "Good," to the end of his species. And then he had watched that same old man prove that the end had not come, that it had never been allowed to come, that someone had been waiting in the dark with a piece of paper that outlasted empires. He saved the file. He did not give it a title. He put the tablet in his bag. He stepped into the transit tube. The doors closed. The chamber emptied. The procedural music resumed, low and harmonic, the sound of a machine that had already moved on. The lights in the auxiliary archives flickered once, then held. Silas did not look up from his catalog. His stylus moved across the tablet. His gray tunic hung on its hook. The folio case waited in the drawer. And 3 billion people, scattered across the outer rim, woke to mornings that were exactly the same as the day before, not knowing they had been saved, not knowing they had ever needed saving, not knowing that the only thing standing between them and legal ghosts was an old man who had spent 11 years filing papers no one asked for, in a room no one visited, with hands that shook and a heart that had learned to beat in time with the hum of a machine that did not know his name. The iris door of the conclave's spire opened once more. A delegate from the Keth Dominion stepped through, alone, and walked to the speaking well. She stood where Silas had stood. She looked at the lectern. The documents were gone, filed by the clerk drones, but the lectern's surface still held the faint impression of a seal that had not been seen in 2,389 years. She placed her hand on it. She held it there for 11 seconds. Then she left. The chamber was empty, the music played, the lights hummed, and somewhere in a drawer on level 3, a folio case waited for the next person small enough to need it.